Some stories from history are so shocking, so contrary to how we think the world should work, that they refuse to be forgotten. They become legends, cautionary tales whispered through the centuries. They remind us that behind walls built for piety and prayer, the human heart can be just as wild, just as desperate, and just as dangerous as anywhere else on earth. This is one of those stories. It's a tale of faith and fury, of sacred vows and unspeakable desires. We're going to 17th century Italy, a world governed by strict religious codes and rigid social ladders. In this world, the convent was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place where women could devote their lives to God, shielded from the temptations of the outside world. But for one woman, those convent walls became a prison, and then a cage for a secret life so scandalous it would end in bloodshed. This is the story of a nun who was also a lover, a mother, and ultimately, a conspirator in a brutal murder. This is the true, dark history of Sister Virginia Maria de Leyva, a woman the world would come to know by a more infamous name, the Nun of Monza. How does a woman sworn to God fall so far? And how many lives would be destroyed just to protect her sins? In the hallowed halls of the Santa Margherita Convent, Sister Virginia was known for her devotion. But behind that serene facade, she harbored a dark secret, a passionate, forbidden love affair with a local nobleman, and the two children she bore him in secret. When a fellow nun threatened to expose everything and bring her world crashing down, a desperate conspiracy was born. A conspiracy that would end in a brutal, sacrilegious murder. How far would a woman of God go to protect her secrets? And who would be the one to pay the ultimate price? To understand the tragedy of Sister Virginia, you first have to understand the world that made her. She was born Mariana de Leyva y Marino on December 4, 1575, in Milan, into a world of almost unimaginable privilege and power. Her father, Martino de Leyva, was a Spanish count, the Count of Monza, a title given to his family by the Holy Roman Emperor himself. Her mother, Virginia Maria Marino, was the daughter of one of Milan's richest bankers. Mariana was born into a world of palaces and politics, of staggering wealth and absolute influence. From the moment she took her first breath, her life was meant to be extraordinary. But fate had other, crueler plans. When Mariana was just a year old, her mother died, plunging the infant into a bitter legal battle over her massive inheritance. Her mother's will was contested, and the fortune that should have been hers was tied up in courts and family squabbles. For the next 12 years, Mariana was raised by aunts. A pawn in a game of dynastic ambition she was far too young to understand. She was a noblewoman by birth, but her future was anything but certain, her destiny held in the hands of her powerful and distant father. For a highborn woman in 17th century Europe, the options were brutally simple. She could marry, forging an alliance to benefit her family, or she could enter a convent. For families with too many daughters, or for those whose marriages were inconvenient or just too expensive, the church provided a respectable and permanent solution. The practice was called forced monication, and it was a common, though often tragic, part of aristocratic life. The church itself had condemned the practice, even threatening to excommunicate families who forced a daughter into the cloister against her will, but the tradition continued. It was a way to keep family fortunes intact, to manage politics, and to dispose of inconvenient daughters. For Mariana de Leyva, her fate was sealed by her father's ambition. Don Martino de Leyva was a man consumed by military campaigns and preserving his lineage, and he saw his daughter not as a person, but as a problem to be solved. To secure the family's wealth and power, he decided Mariana would become a bride of Christ. At the tender age of 13, just a girl, she was forced into the Benedictine convent of Santa Margherita in the town of Monza. She was stripped of her name, Mariana, and given a new one, Sister Virginia Maria, in honor of her dead mother. It was a symbolic death and rebirth. The worldly girl was gone. In her place stood a servant of God. The Santa Margherita convent wasn't a place of humble poverty. It was a high-status institution, a home for the daughters of the elite. And because of her noble blood, Sister Virginia wasn't just another nun. She had a special status. Historical accounts tell us she had her own apartment, a privilege of her family's rank, and was given huge responsibilities. She was put in charge of the convent's property revenues in Monza and was even involved in local justice. By her early 20s, she was also a teacher in the convent school for girls. To the outside world, she was a figure of authority and respect. Writers at the time described her as modest, obedient, and popular. She was the very picture of devotion, a noblewoman who had graciously accepted her holy calling. But beneath this calm surface, a storm was brewing. Forced into a life she didn't choose, stripped of her freedom and her inheritance, Sister Virginia was a prisoner in a gilded cage. The vows she had taken, poverty, chastity, and obedience, were chains binding her to a fate she never asked for. The convent was supposed to be a place of spiritual peace, but for a young woman whose life had been one loss and betrayal after another, it was more likely a place of quiet, simmering rebellion. She was surrounded by the symbols of faith, but her heart was filled with the unresolved anger of her stolen youth. It was a tinderbox of resentment and desire, just waiting for a spark to set it all on fire. And that spark was about to arrive. The geography of temptation is often surprisingly small. The convent of Santa Margherita was its own little world, but it wasn't completely cut off from the town of Monza. Its walls, meant to keep the world out, were right next to the property of a man who was everything the convent stood against. His name was Count Giovanni Paolo Ossio. Ossio was a local aristocrat, charming, wealthy, and with a dangerous reputation. Records show that even before he met Sister Virginia, he was no stranger to violence, having already been accused of murder. He was handsome, bold, and carried himself with the arrogance of a man who believed rules were for other people. His house and its gardens bordered the monastery, a closeness that would soon prove fatal. The convent walls, thick and imposing, couldn't stop the sounds of life from the outside world, nor could they stop a pair of curious eyes from peering over them. The year was 1597. Sister Virginia, now 22, was a respected teacher at the convent school. She was a woman of power and influence inside her cloistered world, yet she was still a prisoner of her vows. It was around this time that her path crossed with Giovanni Paolo Ossio. We don't know exactly how they first met. Maybe she saw him from a window overlooking his garden. Maybe their eyes met during a rare, supervised trip into town. What the historical accounts do make clear is that what started with a glance soon became something far more dangerous. The affair didn't start with a touch, but with a word. According to the records from the church trial that would follow, the two began exchanging letters. This alone was a massive risk, a flagrant violation of the sacred enclosure. Getting letters back and forth was a masterpiece of clandestine logistics. A rope would be lowered from a convent window, passing notes to Ossio's garden below. In his letters, Ossio likely painted a picture of a world beyond the stone walls, a world of passion, freedom, and being adored. For Virginia, a woman who had known only confinement and duty, his words must have felt like a lifeline to a life she thought she'd lost forever. But desire demands more than words. It demands presence. It demands touch. And so, the conspiracy deepened. The next step required accomplices, both inside and outside the convent. According to trial testimonies, Ossio found a local blacksmith and paid him to forge duplicate keys to the convent's doors. This was an act of profound sacrilege, a physical violation of a holy space. Inside the convent, Virginia found her own co-conspirators. The investigation would later reveal that at least two other nuns, Sister Ottavia and Sister Benedetta, along with a priest named Paolo Aragon, knew about the affair and actively helped make it happen. Aragon was a close friend of Ossio's, and his involvement just highlights the shocking level of corruption that could fester even within the church. Why would the other nuns help? Maybe it was friendship, or maybe they were blackmailed. It's also possible they were just swept up in the drama and romance of it all, living vicariously through Virginia's rebellion. Whatever their reasons, their complicity turned a secret affair into a full-blown conspiracy, operating right under the nose of the Mother Superior. With keys in hand and lookouts in place, Giovanni Paolo Ossio could now slip into the convent under the cover of darkness. The stone walls that were meant to protect Virginia's chastity now served to hide her sins. Her private apartment, that perk of her noble status, became their sanctuary. Here, in the heart of a holy place, the nun and the count carried on a torrid and passionate affair. It's hard to overstate how audacious this was. This wasn't just a broken vow. It was a defiant mockery of the church and the society that had imprisoned her. For Virginia, This affair was probably about more than just passion. It was an act of taking her life back. Ocio wasn't just a lover. He was the embodiment of the freedom she'd been denied. He saw her not as Sister Virginia, the bride of Christ, but as Mariana, the woman. He offered her an identity beyond the veil, a taste of the life her father had stolen from her. But this intoxicating freedom came at a terrifying price. Every secret meeting, every whispered word, every forbidden touch added another brick to their wall of lies. They were building a world of deception inside a world of faith, a fragile construction that could shatter at any moment. The risk of being caught was constant and absolute. The consequences would be devastating, not just for them, but for everyone who had helped them. The devil was now inside the garden, and the seeds of tragedy had been sown. What started as a secret affair soon bore forbidden fruit, turning a story of illicit passion into a saga of impossible motherhood. The relationship between Sister Virginia and Giovanni Paolo Ocio wasn't a fleeting fling. It was a long-term, deeply entangled connection that produced consequences neither of them could easily hide. Their affair moved beyond secret meetings and into the terrifying reality of new life. In 1602, 5 years after the affair began, Sister Virginia gave birth to her first child. The baby, a boy, was stillborn. You can only imagine the terror and grief of that moment. A secret birth within the silent, watchful walls of a convent, a child who never drew breath, a tragedy that had to be concealed as if it never happened. This must have been a horrifying turning point. The affair was no longer a game. It had produced a body, a real sign of their sin that had to be disposed of in total secrecy. The records are silent on the details, but the psychological toll on Virginia must have been immense. Some historical accounts say the trauma of the stillbirth led to a temporary end of the affair. The risk had become too real, the potential for disaster too great. But the pull between them was too strong. They started their relationship again, maybe more cautiously at first, but with the same intensity. The very next year, in 1603, Sister Virginia was pregnant again. This time, the child survived. She gave birth to a healthy baby girl. It was a miracle and a catastrophe all at once. A living, breathing secret that could not be silenced. The baby was named Alma Francesca Margherita. Her existence was an immediate, impossible challenge. A crying infant has no place in the disciplined silence of a convent. The logistics of this secret birth and taking care of the baby required an even wider circle of accomplices. The other nuns, Benedetta and Ottavia, must have played a huge role, helping to muffle the sounds, get rid of the evidence, and create diversions. The risk they were all taking had escalated from covering up an affair to hiding a child. It was obvious Alma couldn't stay in the convent. The only solution was for her father to take her. Giovanni Paolo Ocio spirited the infant out of the convent and raised her in his own home. 2 years later, in an act of incredible boldness, he officially acknowledged her as his illegitimate daughter, giving her a legal identity. To the outside world, Alma Francesca was simply the bastard child of a local nobleman. Only a handful of people knew the shocking truth. Her mother was the respected and powerful Sister Virginia Maria, the Nun of Monza. For Virginia, this must have been a unique and agonizing form of motherhood. She was a mother who couldn't raise her child, who could only get news of her daughter from her lover during his nightly visits. She had brought a life into the world, only to have her taken away immediately. This strange, broken family, a nun, a nobleman, and their secret daughter, existed in the shadows, a testament to their enduring and deeply dangerous bond. During this period, Virginia's behavior, as documented in later testimonies, started to change. The strain of living two lives, the constant fear of being discovered, and the emotional chaos of her secret motherhood began to take their toll. The nun once described as obedient and modest became increasingly irritable, moody, and unpredictable with the other sisters. The convent, once a symbol of her oppression, was now the stage for her elaborate lie. She was both a prisoner and a queen in her small kingdom, wielding her power to protect her secrets while her inner world fractured under the pressure. The other nuns who knew the secret were now bound to her by a shared, mortal fear. They were all accomplices. Sisters Benedetta and Ottavia, who had once helped a romance blossom, were now accessories to a scandal that could get them all ruined, excommunicated, or even thrown in prison. The atmosphere within their small, corrupt circle must have been thick with paranoia. Every strange noise, every unexpected visit from a superior, every whisper in the cloister could signal their doom. The conspiracy had grown from two lovers to a small cabal, held together by a secret that was getting heavier by the day. They had managed to hide an affair and 2 children from the world for nearly a decade. It was an incredible feat of deception, but secrets like this have a life of their own. They grow, they fester, and they demand a higher and higher price. The question was no longer if their world would collapse, but when, and who would light the fuse. For years, the conspiracy held. But a secret shared among so many people is a fragile thing, and the walls of Santa Margherita had ears. Not every nun was in on Sister Virginia's deception. Others in the convent began to notice things. They saw the changes in Virginia's behavior, her moods, her strange relationship with Sisters Benedetta and Ottavia. They heard the whispers, the late-night noises that couldn't be explained. The convent was a small, closed-off world, and secrets, no matter how well kept, have a way of poisoning the air. The tipping point came in the summer of 1606. A lay sister at the monastery, a young woman named Caterina Cassini, finally figured it all out. We don't know how. Maybe she overheard something she wasn't meant to. Maybe she saw one of Ossio's secret visits. Or maybe she just got tired of the toxic atmosphere of lies and decided to confront Virginia directly. Whatever her discovery, Caterina made a fatal mistake. She threatened to expose everything. She told Virginia she was going to the authorities, that she would reveal the affair, the children, and the entire web of corruption. For Virginia, this was an existential threat. Exposure meant the total destruction of her life. She would be stripped of her position, publicly shamed, and face the full, brutal force of the church's justice. Her lover, Ossio, would face ruin and likely execution, especially with his criminal record. Their daughter, Alma, would be forever tainted by the scandal. Everything she had risked so much to protect was about to be destroyed by one woman. Panic set in. Virginia immediately ran to Ossio with the terrifying news. His reaction wasn't caution or negotiation. Giovanni Paolo Ossio was a man of action, and violence was a familiar tool for him. He had killed before, and he wouldn't hesitate to do it again to protect his lover and himself. A desperate, dark decision was made. Caterina Cassini could not be allowed to talk. She had to be silenced. Permanently. What followed was a cold-blooded conspiracy to commit murder inside the sacred walls of the convent. According to the trial records, Ossio was the architect of the crime, but Sister Virginia was his willing accomplice. The other nuns in her circle, Sisters Benedetta and Ottavia, were also dragged into the plot. They were in too deep to say no. Their own survival now depended on Caterina's silence. The plan was brutal and calculated. They couldn't just make Caterina disappear. That would raise too many questions. They needed a cover story. First, they murdered her. Historical accounts state that Ossio killed the nun, with Virginia and the others either helping with the act or, at the very least, the cover-up. After killing her, they tried to stage a scene to suggest she had escaped. They smashed a hole in the wall of her cell to make it look like she had broken out and run away. But a body is a hard thing to hide. Their disposal of Caterina's remains was gruesome and panicked. According to one account, they buried her head in the convent's well and hid the rest of her body in the monastery's henhouse. It was a desperate, horrific act designed to erase every trace of their crime. They then spread the rumor that Sister Caterina, tired of convent life, had run away. For a while, it seemed to work. The initial search for the missing nun turned up nothing, and the official story was accepted. But Ossio's bloody work wasn't finished. There was another loose end, the blacksmith who had made the duplicate keys. If he were ever questioned, he could link Ossio directly to the secret entries into Santa Margherita. Determined to seal every crack in their wall of silence, Ossio hunted the blacksmith down and murdered him as well. The conspiracy was now sealed in blood, twice over. Sister Virginia, the once pious nun, was now an accomplice to 2 murders. She had crossed a line from which there was no coming back. To protect her sins, she had sanctioned the ultimate sin. She then turned her focus back inside the convent, using Caterina's fate as a weapon. She explicitly threatened the other complicit nuns, telling them that if they ever spoke a word, they would suffer the same fate. Fear, which had once been their bond, was now her instrument of control. She was no longer just a conspirator. She was a tyrant, ruling over her small circle of terrorized accomplices. The convent of Santa Margherita had become a tomb, haunted by the ghost of a murdered nun. The story of the Nun of Monza is one of the most shocking and complex cases of historical true crime. It reveals so much about the pressures, secrets, and brutal realities of the 17th century. If you're finding this deep dive into the darker side of history as fascinating as I do, take a moment to subscribe and hit that like button. It really helps us continue to unearth and share these incredible and often terrifying stories from the past. Now, let's get back to the unraveling of the convent conspiracy. A crime built on so many lies and involving so many people can't stay buried forever. Despite Ossio's brutal attempts at a cover-up, the rot at the heart of the Santa Margherita convent began to seep out. Rumors are like ghosts. They're hard to pin down, but you can feel their presence. The town of Monza began to whisper. The sudden disappearance of Sister Caterina, the increasingly erratic behavior of Sister Virginia, the dark reputation of Count Ossio. All these threads began to weave together into a tapestry of suspicion. The very atmosphere of the convent had been corrupted. Fear is a poor foundation for silence, and the complicit nuns, Benedetta and Ottavia, were living in constant terror, not just of the church authorities, but of Virginia and Ossio themselves. Eventually, the whispers grew too loud to ignore. They reached the ears of the governor of Milan, who started taking an interest in the strange things happening at the Monza convent. The official investigation began, and the conspiracy, which had held for so long, started to crumble with astonishing speed. The first to fall was Giovanni Paolo Ossio. In 1607, a year after Caterina's murder, he was arrested. But Ossio, ever the rogue, wasn't one to be caged easily. He managed to escape from prison, becoming a fugitive with a death sentence officially declared on him in his absence. On the run, Ossio's paranoia and violence spiraled out of control. He knew that the two other nuns, Benedetta and Ottavia, were the weakest links. They had witnessed everything and could send him to his death. According to trial records, he hunted them down after they had also fled the convent. He tried to kill them both to ensure their permanent silence, but his attempts failed, leaving them badly wounded but alive. This act of desperate, self-defeating violence would be his ultimate undoing. Having survived an attack by their former co-conspirator, sisters Benedetta and Ottavia now had no reason to protect him. They became the prosecution's star witnesses, their testimony forming the backbone of the case against both Ossio and Virginia. Ossio's freedom didn't last long. A man with a death sentence on his head has few friends he can trust. He sought refuge with a man he thought was an ally, but was instead betrayed. He was murdered by this supposed friend, a grim and pathetic end for the charming count who had started this entire tragedy. His properties were confiscated and destroyed, a final, symbolic erasure of his legacy in Monza. With Ossio dead, the full weight of the investigation fell upon the woman at the center of it all, Sister Virginia Maria. The Archbishop of Milan, the powerful Cardinal Federico Borromeo, took personal charge of the case. This was a scandal of the highest order, striking at the heart of the church's moral authority, and he was determined to root it out completely. Virginia was removed from Monza and placed under surveillance at another convent in Milan while the church trial was prepared. The investigation was meticulous and damning. Caterina Cassini's remains were eventually discovered on the convent grounds, providing the physical proof of a murder. The testimony of the other nuns, combined with all the rumors and evidence, painted a clear and horrifying picture of what had happened behind those walls. The affair, the children, the corruption, and the cold-blooded murder. It all came pouring out. The secret world that Sister Virginia had fought so hard to protect for a decade had finally and irrevocably collapsed. The stage was now set for one of the most sensational church trials of the 17th century. The trial of Sister Virginia Maria de Leyva began on November 27, 1607. This wasn't a public spectacle in a civil court, but a canonical trial held by the church for the church. The chief interrogator was Vicar Girolamo Saracino, acting under the direct authority of Cardinal Borromeo. The goal was to uncover the spiritual and moral rot that had led to such a disaster. The records of this trial, many of which survive today, give us an astonishing window into the events. Sister Virginia, stripped of her power, was now a defendant fighting for her life. Her defense was a product of its time, a desperate plea that blurred the lines between guilt and victimhood. She couldn't deny the core facts. The evidence was just too overwhelming. Instead, she claimed she had lost her free will. She insisted that she had been under the influence of irresistible, diabolical forces. She argued that the devil had possessed her, forcing her to commit these terrible sins. In the deeply superstitious world of the 17th century, it was a defense that was at least plausible. She painted herself as a victim of supernatural evil, a soul tormented and controlled by impulses she could not fight. The interrogations were relentless. From November 1607 to March 1608, the court also questioned the priest, Paulo Aragon, who had been Ocio's friend and a key helper in the affair. The focus then shifted back to Virginia. In May of 1608, the court, perhaps not satisfied with her confessions, resorted to a darker method of getting the truth: torture. Under the agony of physical torment, Virginia's story began to change, and she confirmed the accusations against Aragon, implicating him completely. The use of torture was a standard, if brutal, part of the justice system of the era, designed to break a defendant's will. Her testimony, along with the harrowing accounts from Sisters Benedetta and Ottavia, sealed her fate. She was found guilty on all counts: of breaking her holy vows, of profound moral corruption, of conspiracy, and of complicity in the murder of Sister Caterina Cassini. The verdict was never really in doubt. The only question was the punishment. The sentence handed down by Cardinal Borromeo was a masterpiece of psychological cruelty. She wasn't to be executed, nor was she sent to a normal prison. Her punishment was to be walled in for 13 years. This sentence, known as murderous latus, was a form of living burial. Virginia was taken to the retired home of Santa Valeria in Milan. There, she was placed in a small, windowless cell. The door was then bricked up, sealing her off completely from the world. Her only connection to humanity was a small hole in the wall through which a meager bit of food and water was passed each day. She was to live in absolute silence and solitude, with no human contact, no light, and nothing but her own thoughts and sins for company. It was a sentence designed to be a living penance, forcing her to confront the enormity of her crimes in a darkness as deep as the one she had allowed to grow in her own soul. It was a fate many considered worse than death. For 13 years, Sister Virginia endured this unimaginable torment. The fact that she survived is a testament to her sheer resilience, or perhaps her will to repent. Historical accounts, including writings from Cardinal Borromeo himself, suggest that during this time, she underwent a profound spiritual transformation. She apparently devoted herself to prayer and penance, and her survival was seen by some as a sign of divine mercy. After 13 years, in 1622, her sentence was eased. The wall wasn't torn down, but she was allowed more human contact, and she lived out the rest of her days in that same monastery. Sister Virginia Maria de Leyva, the Nun of Monza, died on January 17, 1650, at the age of 74, having spent more than 40 years as a prisoner of the Church. She was buried in an unmarked grave, her name officially erased, but her story was just beginning. The story of the Nun of Monza didn't end with her death. It transformed into a legend, a dark and compelling piece of Italian folklore. Her life became a subject of fascination, a symbol of the struggle between faith and human nature. The scandal was so profound that it was immortalized in one of the greatest works of Italian literature, Alessandro Manzoni's 19th-century novel, The Betrothed. In the novel, she appears as the character Gertrude, a complex and tragic figure whose story, though fictionalized, brought the tale of the nun's crimes to a global audience. Her story forces us to ask some unsettling questions. Was Sister Virginia a monster, a cold-blooded killer hiding behind a veil? Or was she a victim of a cruel system that forced her into a life she never chose, pushing her down a path to rebellion and tragedy? The truth, as it so often is likely somewhere in the gray area between the two. She was a woman of privilege who was denied all control, a figure of piety who harbored deep resentments, a lover whose passion led to bloodshed. Her life is a chilling reminder that the institutions we build to contain human nature can become the very places where our darkest impulses are forged. The walls of the Santa Margherita Convent are long gone, demolished in the 20th century. But the ghost of Sister Virginia lingers. Her story whispers down through the centuries, a haunting testament to a sacred vow that was broken, a secret that was worth killing for, and a conspiracy of sin that unfolded in the one place no one ever thought to look. It reminds us that evil doesn't always wear a monstrous face. Sometimes, it wears a habit and kneels in prayer, just waiting for the cover of darkness. The true stories from our past are often more shocking than any fiction. If you want to keep exploring the hidden, controversial, and fascinating corners of history, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on. Drop a comment below and let us know what historical crime or mystery you think we should investigate next. Thanks for watching.